It's Tuesday, so that means it's time for another top 10 video. Going back and redoing a video I did a couple years ago when the channel was much smaller and my opinions were slightly different, at least I think, I'm going to be giving you what my patrons voted for this week, my top 10 D&D 5e cantrips. That's a little bit tricky. Cantrips are very powerful, very useful, a ton of utility, and a lot of people have a lot of different opinions on what they think is good and what they think is not. So I'm going to give you my top 10, actually 10, no more, no less. So if you want to see what those are, stay tuned. However, before we jump into that, I want to tell you about the sponsor for today's video. Something that I'm extremely excited about is a brand new Kickstarter that just launched several hours, not even a full hour ago, really, by the time I'm making this video, called Dreadful Realms: Caverns of the Wise Minister. So here it is. You can see it is already halfway to funding, and it still has 31 days to go. I'm not going to play the video. I already watched it, but the setting for this is phenomenal. This is a adventure module set in a cool underground world in a city called Sepulcher. It has a whole bunch of stuff to do, people going into the underworld to escape oppression, and the Wise Minister, who's like part of the society, is actually an aboleth, which is awesome. And it deals with a very real sort of evolutionary thing of what happens if a ton of people were driven underground and spent time underground. How would the bodies and physiology and things shift to be an underground race? So it says the first 50 PDF and first 50 print pledges will receive a free 15-minute atmospheric soundtrack, which is awesome. So there's also a couple early bird things, so the sooner you jump in on this, the better. And you can see right here, Caverns of the Wise Minister, core funding is around £2,000 to produce PDF and physical versions of this 40,000 plus word setting guide. It includes 5 new playable races, 4 new subclasses, 5 new backgrounds, new monsters, spells, magic items, and equipment, and setting appropriate mechanics for social standing and enhanced darkness rules, right? It being underground, it's a big deal. Got some of the best folks in the industry, right? People who have written for Adventures League, Vampire the Masquerade, big names on the DM's Guild, Mage the Ascension, all sorts of great. There's a really powerful team behind this, and you can see the names here and check out their social media and find out more about it. Super excited about this. I have not backed it yet myself, but I am planning to do so. I'm always looking for interesting settings and a cool Underdark, especially after I just did my my top 10, my top 7 races from 3.5, and I liked the Vril, the sort of goblin bat-like creature. This seems just like it's right up my alley. And yeah, the team looks amazing, and you just saw it go up as we're sitting here talking. So there'll be a link in the description below if you want to go and check that out. Thank you again to Dreadful Realms for sponsoring this video. And we will talk real quick now about what the rules are for this top 10 cantrips. They got to be a cantrip in 5th edition, not homebrew. I am going to include the Mind Sliver cantrip as well, which I guess is a little bit of a spoiler. We know it's coming in Tasha's Cauldron. We've already seen it published in full from the Icewind Dale sort of interactive map, as well as the various leaks. So that's going to be included, but anything that's been an officially published cantrip is game for this list. Number 10, Sapping Sting. This is number 10 on this list because I've never had a chance to use it, because it's one of those weird things that exists in Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, which is technically a Dunamancy spell, I guess, and the problem with it being there's no technical way to actually learn it unless you're a Graviturgy or Chronomancy wizard. Otherwise, it's really up just to your DM to decide whether or not you're able to learn it. But I like it because it does something different. It's a Constitution saving throw, which is a little bit unfortunate, right? Monsters usually have decent Constitution, so it's not the best. But if they fail the save, they take a D4 necrotic damage and fall prone. And then it increases by a D4 on all cantrip levels, right? 5, 11, and 17. But I like that it inflicts the prone condition. It's also necrotic damage, not heavily resisted in the game. It's got a range of 30 feet, no material components required. But activating, giving someone the prone condition can be huge. right? This could be advantage on attack rolls. This could be the difference between your rogue getting sneak attack or not. This could be a way for your paladin or fighter to fish for crits. Depending on the class you are, how you have access to this spell, you might be able to do this and then attack yourself, right? If you are maybe an Eldritch Knight, right? You could bonus action or cast the spells in action, bonus action, make an attack. If you're the new updated Blade Singer coming in Tasha's Cauldron, you could do this as one of your attacks and then use your second attack from extra attack to attack them while prone with advantage. It's got a lot of versatility, but it's so high on this list because I've never gotten a chance to actually use it because no one I've played with has allowed Dunamancy spells in their game. Number 9. Create Bonfire. I'm stubborn. I really like this spell. I know a lot of people don't. I have a love for this spell, and I've also never gotten a chance to play a character who has it, but I just really like it, and I would love to use it in one of my games because I think how it works is really cool. So it's an action. It works out to 60 feet, which is neat, and you actually create a bonfire that fills a 5-foot cube. The only kind of downside to it is concentration and but it does last for a minute. And then any creature that's in the space must succeed a dexterity saving throw or take a d8 fire damage. They must also make the saving throw if they move into the space for the first time or end their turn there. It ignites flammable objects that aren't carried or worn and increases a d8 damage on cantrip scaling levels. So unlike other things like, say, a produce flame or a sacred flame, which is either an attack roll or a saving throw like Sacred Flame is, this is still a dexterity saving throw. However, it stays in the space. So this has the benefit of, like, they might save on this turn, but if they, the first time they move into it or if they end their turn there. So depending on where you place this in the scenario, you might be able to keep an enemy in the fire, right? If you're like backed against the wall or someone's got them grappled so they can't move and the fire's underneath them, that's a potential for them to take the damage every turn. You could put this at a doorway or in a doorway, so to come through to get to you, they have to walk through the bonfire, therefore triggering the damage. It also opens itself up to any kind of shenanigans with spells that are activated or things that happen when there's an open flame around. So it has a lot of benefits. I think Pyrotechnics is the spell that a lot of people use for that. And I just really like it. I think it's cool. I really should get a chance or try to play a character that would make use of this. And it is pretty widely available, right? Druid, Sorcerer, Warlock, Wizard, and Artificer all have access to this spell. Number 8. Mage Hand is a super useful spell. You will never find a time where you wish or you have Mage Hand and you are upset that you did. It has a range of 30 feet. Most importantly, it is not concentration to have this hand up for a minute. It is a floating spectral hand. It lasts for that time frame or until you dismiss it, and it ends if it moves more than 30 feet away from you, but you can use your action to control it. It can manipulate an object, open an unlocked door or container, stow or retrieve an item from a container, or pour the contents out of a vial. You can move the hand up to 30 feet each time you use it. It can attack, activate magic items, or carry more than 10 pounds, but it could push open a door. It could try to open a door if the door is not locked. It could open a chest. The things you can do with this, and 10 pounds is not a small amount of weight. You know, this might be enough to carry something to drop it onto a pressure plate, right? It might be enough to open that chest from a distance to say, like, oh, it is trapped. Or, oh, hey, look, we tried to open the chest with a mage hand. Turns out it's a mimic. There's a lot of things you can do with a mage hand. Just carrying again and dropping things, placing things in locations, silently having it go over and pick up a bottle off a shelf and bring it to you. It doesn't make any noise. You could open up a door into a room and you have to get the key off the wall, right? It goes in there. You don't enter the room at all. No living being enters the room. Just the hand goes in, gets the key, and comes out. If it triggers a trap, no one's in the room to trigger it. If it requires living beings to enter, that doesn't happen because it's just a spectral hand. There's tons more utility for this, and then obviously certain classes and races can make it invisible. Arcane Trickster can do all sorts of crazy stuff with it. It has a lot of utility. And I don't know, I just really like it. It's definitely one of my go-to sort of utility cantrips. Number 7. Speaking of utility cantrips, Mold Earth. This is another one that I feel like gets slept on a lot and can do a lot of really cool things if you're creative. And I'll also preface this by saying most cantrips, with the exceptions of the ones that are just like they straight up deal damage and do nothing else, a lot of the utility cantrips are really only limited by what your DM will allow or how creative you can get and how much shenanigans your GM will allow with your creativity. So as an action out to 30 feet, you can displace a portion of dirt within a 5-foot cube. You can manipulate it in one of the following ways. If you target an area of loose dirt, you can instantaneously excavate it, move it along the ground, and deposit it 5 feet away. This doesn't cause enough force to cause damage. You can cause shapes, colors, or both to appear on the dirt or stone, spelling out words, images, or shaping the patterns. This lasts for an hour. This can be a way to leave a trail for someone following you or someone trying to locate you, and then it'll dissipate after an hour. So it has the benefit of like it's there for a short period of time. Maybe your allies can find it and then your enemies can't. And if the dirt or stone you target is on the ground, you can cause it to become difficult terrain. Alternatively, you can cause the ground to become normal terrain if it is difficult terrain. This lasts for an hour. That's something I feel like gets, again, slept on a lot. Difficult terrain can be a very useful tool for you. And it takes you 6 seconds to make a 5-foot square of difficult terrain, and it lasts for an hour. This is not concentration. There is a benefit here. It says, if you cast this multiple times, you can have, my mistake, you can have no more than 2 of its non-instantaneous effects active at a time, and you can dismiss such an effect as an action. So you can make basically a 10-foot square, rather, of difficult terrain. Depending on where you do that, though, it lasts for an hour. That could be a decent way to slow down someone in pursuit if it's a very tight quarters. But what I like the most is the top one. You could, in theory, excavate a 5-foot trench around your entire encampment and put the 5-foot mound of dirt on the other side. So they have to scale a 5-foot mound of dirt to fall down into a 5-foot pit to then come up to get into your encampment. That's a pretty decent way to secure your camp if you don't have access to magical means of protection or things like that. And you could always move the loose dirt further away, right? So like, you excavate it up. Now you've got a 5-foot trench and a 5-foot pile of dirt. Push that 5-foot pile of dirt back. Keep making a trench. Make it a 10-foot wide, 5-foot deep trench, or however you want to do it. You can get crazy with your trenching capabilities here and really build like a moat around your camp. You could fill it with water. Someone can create water in some way. You could do a lot of crazy stuff for just a cantrip. Also, if you need to hide remains of enemies, bury an ally, unfortunately, or an NPC, you could take the time to use a shovel and dig that grave, or you could be like, you know what, let's bury him 5 feet deep as opposed to 6, and then just fill it back in. Plus, if you enjoy kind of feeling sort of like a Jedi, you can move things, your rocks or your dirt. I don't know, I really like it. I have it in a couple of campaigns that I've played in, but I've never really gotten to get too much into the shenanigans because I typically will have access to something like Leomin's Tiny Hut, and then that kind of removes the need for crazy shenanigans. But I don't know. Do you have any interesting stories using the Mold Earth spell? I'd love to hear them in the comments. Number 6. Shocking Grasp is the sort of go-to melee spell for any caster, or even non-casters if they can gain access to it through one means or another, because it has one very interesting ability. So it is action, it is range of touch, so you have to be able to physically reach the creature. It does lightning damage, which is not heavily resisted as, say, something like poison or fire damage. You make a melee spell attack, so it has the benefit of possibly being able to crit. And I've said it before, I feel like when I'm making an attack roll, I feel like the dice, and if I fail, it's on me rather than on the enemy just succeeding on a saving throw. If they're wearing metal armor or are made of metal, you have advantage on the roll outright, potentially triggering that crit even more so. And they take a d8 damage, which increases on cantrip scaling levels, but they can't take reactions until the start of their next turn. So if you hit them with this, you can move away free of opportunity attacks, which has a lot of benefits in a lot of ways, right? It's dealing damage, it's maybe critting, especially if they have metal armor, and then you can feel free to run away using your movement and then your bonus action to do whatever kinds of shenanigans you want to get into. And again, it just has a lot of benefits. I wish there was more like aside from just Shocking Grasp, like good touch-based cantrips for wizards or any kind of arcane caster, or any caster really of any kind, if they wanted to. There's a couple out there. There's like Shillelagh and I think Primal Savagery, but there's not too many. I think we need more attacking cantrips for all the different classes. Number 5. I always struggle putting Eldritch Blast on these kinds of lists because it's only really typically accessible by a Warlock, though obviously there's other ways you can get it. And it really, in my mind, only seems to benefit the Warlock the most because they have all of the invocations that allow them to change things up. Now, maybe some of that will change with Tasha's Cauldron, I don't know. But it has the maximum kind of cantrip damage range, which is 120 feet. It does force damage, which is, aside from like Radiant, one of the least resisted damage types in the game. Very few things are resistant to force, and I think it's only a very small section that are immune. It does a D10, which is a pretty big damage die, the second biggest die you're going to have for dealing damage with a cantrip. And it also has the benefit of when you hit cantrip scaling levels 5, 11, and 17, you don't deal extra damage, you do additional attacks. Each one of these is an attack roll, therefore it can crit, and each one of them does multiple beams. And you make a separate attack roll for each. So if you miss one, you might hit with the second one. You might crit with one and do a regular hit with the next one. If you have advantage on all attack rolls, for some reason, all of these separate attacks are with advantage. You don't have to decide to hit the same target. You can split it up and do multiple targets. And then again, if you're a Warlock and have access to the certain invocations, it will do nothing but boost what you can do, dealing extra damage, reducing movement speed, pushing, shoving, pulling, all sorts of great stuff you can do with Eldritch Blast. It's just too good not to include it on this list. But I like I said, I often struggle because it's basically a Warlock's one-trick pony. And most other, I've seen a couple other people take it with like Magic Initiate or as a Bard's Magical Secrets, which seems like a waste to me because they'll never get the Charisma modifier to damage unless they multiclass, and it just doesn't work out. I don't know. Again, maybe you have some great example of why it's so good. I'd love to hear it. Number 4. Green Flame Blade. There are the two sort of melee attacking cantrips, Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade. Green Flame Blade has always been my favorite one. I'm not sure if it was supposed to be an allusion to Acquisitions Incorporated and the Green Flame. Maybe. I also don't remember there being a hyphen between green and flame, but apparently there is. And this is one of those really cool cantrips that has a ton of utility for a lot of folks because it has the benefit of not being tied to your spellcasting ability modifier for the kind of initial work. It is a melee attack, or it says make a melee attack with a weapon against one creature. So if you're using a finesse weapon, it uses whatever your dexterity is. If you're using a strength-based weapon, it uses a strength. So you are fundamentally making the attack, and the only time your modifier comes into play is for if the damage jumps to the next creature. So it says, on a hit, the target suffers the attack as normal, which if you only have one singular attack, that's fine. You'll only be doing one attack anyway, so you're still doing what you would normally do to the base creature. And then the fire that wreathes your weapon leaps to a target of your choice that you can see within 5 feet of it. That target then taking damage equal to your spellcasting ability modifier. So again, if you only have a low ability modifier, like that sucks, they'll take some damage, which is better than none. But the real thing that makes it powerful is when you level up and go to higher levels at cantrip scaling levels 5, 11, and 17, that initial damage that you deal goes up by a d8 of fire damage. So at level 5, that first hit does normal melee weapon damage plus a d8 fire damage, and that subsequent creature that would have the fire jump to them, they take a d8 plus your spellcasting ability modifier, and then at 11 and 17 both increase. So at level 17, that initial attack you're doing does your regular melee damage like you would normally do, plus an additional 3d8 fire damage, and a target within 5 feet will take 3d8 plus your spellcasting ability modifier in damage. This, again, is super useful for classes that only get one singular attack. If you're getting this through maybe Magic Initiate on a Cleric, or maybe on a Bard that doesn't have 2 attacks, You could also, again, now the new Blade Singer we know is going to allow you to cast a cantrip as one of your attacks from extra attack. Green Flame Blade or Booming Blade as the start to deal extra damage, and then a secondary attack to follow it. A lot of really cool stuff can happen with it. And I just like the flavor and the fire of Green Flame Blade. Maybe it is because I'm such an Ak Ink fan over Booming Blade, but there you go. Number 3. Mind Sliver. This is a cantrip we've seen come out through various Unearthed Arcana, has pretty much remained unchanged, and is now going to be in Tasha's Cauldron. We've seen it in leaks. We saw it in the Icewind Dale interactive map. We now saw it in this GameSpot article as well, alongside Spirit Shroud. But I like this. I feel that this is very akin to a Vicious Mockery in a lot of ways, but in some instances can be even better depending on the scenario. And I really do feel it's a little bit of a travesty that bards don't get access to this, at least so far as we know. But it is an enchantment cantrip. It is an action, a range of 60 feet. It lasts for 1 round, non-concentration. The target must make an intelligence saving throw, something that a lot of monsters are not great at. They take a d6 psychic damage. Psychic damage, again, not something heavily resisted. And they subtract a d4 from the next saving throw they make before the end of their next turn. So that means you could do this and then in theory get, depending on how it works out, before the end of your next turn, which is even better because that means if you hit them with Mind Sliver and nobody else hits them with the spell, it can come back around. You can try to hit them with a heavy hitting spell and they got to basically have a freebie Bane on their saving throws for a d4. And again, the damage scales at cantrip scaling levels. So the d4 is still a d4 regardless, but the damage will be 2d6, 3d6, and eventually 4d6 at level 17. Plus the art here, really cool. Not how I pictured it looking, but I really like the art of it. And yeah, I think it's a super useful spell. Again, the fact that it's intelligence saving throw is pretty huge. And I'm not sure, but you might be able to get into weird shenanigans involving the cantrip, and then possibly, if you're an enchantment wizard, there might be funky things you can do. And again, if you have access, if you're a sorcerer, let's say, right, and you can cast a cantrip as an action, like this one, and reduce their saving throw, and then use sorcery points to make a spell cast as a bonus action, you could then double whammy them on the turn, and then possibly reduce their saving throw, making them fail the saving throw for the big hit on the second spell. And again, it doesn't even necessarily have to be damage. That could be a mind-affecting spell where you shut them down with something like a whole monster or a whole person or whatever. I really like Mind Sliver. I wish we got more cantrips in Tasha's Cauldron, but if we had to get one, I'll take it. Number 2. Minor Illusion. This is one of the most powerful utility spells out there, and it kind of goes back to what I was talking about at the start, where it's really limited to what your DM will let you get away with, and I'll explain. So it's got a 30-foot range, and then it is material components, somatic components, no verbal though, so you don't need to speak to cast the spell. It lasts for a minute, non-concentration, and you can create a sound or image of an object within range that lasts for the duration, so 1 minute. It also ends if you dismiss it or cast it again. If you create a sound, its volume can range from a whisper to a scream. It can be your voice, someone else's voice, a lion's roar, beating of drums, or any other sound you choose. The sound continues unabated throughout the duration, or you can make discrete sounds at different times before the spell ends. So, a couple of things you can do just with the sound aspect, which isn't even really why I like it. If you could, like, in theory, you could make, you could do the ventriloquism, throw your voice 30 feet away and have yourself talking over there. Make a woman's or a man or somebody, a gnome, elf voice screaming over there. That grabs everybody's attention. They want to go see, whoa, what's happening? What's happening? We better go check that out. People go over there. That's the distraction. You get in and go where you need to go. A lion's roar, right? Maybe you're in a zoo or something and you make a lion's roar behind somebody and they freak out. It scares them and you can use that to your advantage. It could be a low, like whisper sound, which could also get people's attention. If you don't want to go high-pitched scream. It could be, again, the sound of drums. Maybe that has a benefit. If you're in sort of like a Moria scenario and you have the drums banging, right? That means drums in the deep, the goblins are coming. That could be a big thing for you. But it also says it could be your voice or someone else's voice. And this could get really interesting if you're clever with like deception and mimicking a voice. So like you could pretend to be somebody else. Like if you could disguise yourself or look some other way with like a disguise kit and then use minor illusion to change your vocal pattern to like, well, like you're going to just mimic, you're just going to like lip sync a voice and it's going to sound like somebody else because you're having that sound be generated from minor illusion. It says you can create a sound though, not like a long string of dialogue. So you'll have to think about how you could work with that. But the reason that I really like it is this next bit. If you create an image of an object, such as a chair, muddy footprints, a small chest, it must be no longer larger than a 5-foot cube. The image can't create sound, light, smell, or any other sensory effect. Physical interaction with the image reveals it to be an illusion because things can pass through it. If a creature uses its action to examine the sound or image, the creature can determine that it's an illusion with a successful investigation check against your spell save DC. If a creature discerns the illusion for what it is, the illusion becomes faint to the creature. My point being with this, I've said it a bunch of times in other videos and other things, people don't have a reason to automatically disbelieve everything for the sake of just disbelieving it, right? If there's a room full of barrels and crates and you cast minor illusion on top of yourself, the 5-foot cube of you, and you make it look just like another crate, Joe Schmo walking through the room is not going to think that, wow, that crate amongst that other thing of crates looks way out of place. I better investigate that to see if it's an illusion. Something they may not know you're capable of, something they might not have any reason to even consider. So you, the person casting it, know it's an illusion, so you can see through it and see out no problem. They can't see in, though, because they think it's an illusion. Again, if you make noise, if it seems really out of place, like they run into a room and it's completely barren except for a barrel in the middle of the room, they might be, well, like, that's a little weird. Why is there one singular barrel in the middle of this room and nothing else? That looks a little off. Maybe they go to inspect it. But if it doesn't seem out of place, there's no reason for an NPC to think, oh, this must be out of place. Maybe they have true sight and they can see through it. I don't know. But that really comes down again to what the DM will allow and not allow. If you're running down a hallway and you turn a corner and there's like an open archway that's 5 feet high and it's all stone wall the whole way, and you cast minor illusion to make it look like it's just a continuous stone wall with no archway there, if these people don't know the hallway they're chasing you down, there's no reason for them to expect that there's a random 5-foot archway here when it just looks like a regular stone wall, and they should, in theory, run right past it because they're not expecting anything. If you're outside in the outdoors and you do sort of like a Sam and Frodo thing where you cast minor illusion to make yourself look like a rock in a field where it seems like rocks could be, there's no reason, again, for someone to second guess, like, oh, there's a rock here in the outdoors for some reason. That seems out of place. Let me inspect it. No, they'll just walk right by you like you're under a Lorien cloak. That's my whole point with minor illusion. It's super useful, but it's only limited to your imagination and what the DM will allow you to get away with. Number 1. And number 1, True Strike. I'm sorry, I can't lie to you guys that hard. No, it's Guidance, obviously. Guidance is the best spell in the game. Sorry to fake you out there, but no, it's Guidance. It's an action spell, it's concentration, but it's the most versatile spell, and the only time it gets a little funky is when you try to start metagaming with it, and I can understand that. So, you touch a willing creature, it is touch reminder, so that you could touch yourself to give it to yourself. You could touch an ally, but it's not out to a distance unless you have a subclass feature or something that lets you do so. And then the target adds a d4 to the number roll to one ability check of its choice. It can roll the die before or after making the ability check, then the spell ends. So it gets into a little bit of a funky of a metagamey type scenario, depending on how you know you're going to make an ability check. Right, so if you're like, hey, I'm going to pick this lock, someone could be like, hang on, Guidance, and then you'll do that. You know, hey, I'm going to try to sneak down this hallway. Okay, Guidance. But when do you know, like, hey, I'm going to make this history check? Well, let me guide you while you remember this thing. You know what I mean? So there's different times where it can be a little funky. In theory, it's an ability check, so it adds a d4 to your initiative roll, right? So, you know, you could, in theory, say every minute, as long as I'm able to, if I'm not concentrating on another spell or trying to be silent because this has verbal components, every minute of every hour of every day that I'm awake, I will cast guidance. When the spell ends, I will cast guidance again. When the spell ends, I will cast guidance again. So I'm perpetually under the effects of guidance. So if we happen to get into a combat randomly, I roll a d20 for initiative and add a d4 to that roll because I had guidance for that ability check. That is very metagamey, so I don't disagree if people say that's stupid and you shouldn't be able to do it. But in theory, there's nothing saying you shouldn't be able to do that. That's how things work. Technically, the game works that way. I also could see why you'd be like, well, that's kind of dumb. You're constantly, ever vigilantly, every minute casting the same spell, which could get into a problem if you're in a conversation and you're like, oh, hold on, guidance. And they're like, whoa, what are you doing? What spell are you casting? You know, hey, I'm going to persuade the shopkeeper. Well, let me give you guidance. Well, as the shopkeep, am I now immediately on edge because you're going to talk to me and your friend touches you and mutters a couple of words and touches you? I don't know. It's just super useful. Again, anytime you know you're going to make a check or you have to actively do something. Hey, I'm going to try to break down this door. Hey, I'm going to try to lift this box, pick this lock, sneak away. Hey, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to try and convince them of something. Well, then maybe you cast guidance beforehand and then you go in. But not when you're in the presence of everybody else. That might seem a little iffy. So anyway, that is my top 10 D&D 5e cantrips. I have not gone back to look at what I already did when I did D&D cantrips before in the past. So I might be right on target with the same exact spells. I know Mind Sliver wasn't there because it didn't exist. But thank you again to Dreadful Realms for sponsoring this video. Please go ahead and check that out. Again, early bird discounts if you join it now. Link in the description. That's also my referral link. So like, hey, if a lot of people go there and back it through that link, then they know, hey, look, Ted from Immersion did us a big favor, and that could be a cool thing. So thank you all so much for watching. Thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for continuing to support me and the channel and for voting for this topic for the Top 10 Tuesday. And I will see you all next time.